They say family always comes first, but what if family turns you into their personal ATM? You know, when people talk about family, they often paint this picture of unconditional love, of always being there for each other no matter what. But if you've lived long enough, you know that sometimes, family can be the first to test your patience, your values, and even your sense of fairness. This is my story. And trust me, it's one that spiraled in ways I never imagined. It all started when my sister lost her job. Now, I get it, life happens. We've all been through rough patches, and losing a job can be devastating. Bills pile up, the stress keeps you awake at night, and suddenly, everything feels like it's slipping through your fingers. I wanted to be compassionate. I really did. But compassion doesn't mean handing over your entire life savings just because someone demands it. And that's exactly what my sister did. She didn't just ask for a little help with groceries, or to cover her electric bill for a month. No, she demanded that I start paying her mortgage, not loaning her money, not splitting costs. Demanded. At first, I honestly thought I misheard her. We were sitting at our mom's dining table, having one of those tense family dinners where everyone tries to act polite but you can feel the undercurrent of stress buzzing beneath the surface. My sister cleared her throat and said, very plainly, "Since I'm out of work, you'll have to take over my mortgage payments." I laughed. Not because I thought it was funny, but because I thought it was a joke. Who says something like that with a straight face? But she wasn't joking. Her eyes were dead serious. I tried to play it off gently at first. "You mean you need help for a month or two?" I asked, thinking maybe she was just stressed and not explaining herself clearly. But she shook her head. "No. I mean for as long as it takes. You make more money than I do. You don't have a family to support. It's only fair." Fair. That word burned me, because let me tell you something, I've worked my tail off to get where I am. I didn't have handouts. I didn't have shortcuts. I grinded through late nights, crappy jobs, and more rejection emails than I can count before I found my current position. And now that I finally had a little stability, my own savings, and a shot at building a future, she wanted me to funnel it into her house. Her house, by the way, that she bought knowing full well she was stretching herself thin. Granite countertops, oversized backyard, flashy neighborhood, she wanted it all, and now, she wanted me to subsidize it. I told her no. Calmly. Firmly. Just, no. And that should have been the end of it, right? A grown woman doesn't get her way, she sulks for a bit, and then figures things out. But no. My sister turned it into World War III. The next family gathering, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. Mom, Dad, cousins, even Grandma. She painted me as the selfish younger brother who had made it, and was now too stingy to help his own flesh and blood. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, listening to her rant about how I was sitting on a pile of money while she was fighting just to keep a roof over her kids' heads. This wait and made us pictures with you, man. Now here's the kicker. She doesn't even have kids. She has 2 cats. Lovely animals, sure. But hardly the starving children she was making them out to be. I tried to respond calmly, but every word I said was drowned out by her shouting. The room was buzzing with whispers, side eyes, and uncomfortable shuffling. Grandma, bless her, sat quietly in the corner, her eyes fixed on me, as if waiting to see how I would handle it. And that moment, that silence between us, told me something. This wasn't going away. If I didn't draw a line now, my sister was going to bulldoze every boundary I had. So I told her, point blank, "I'm not paying your mortgage. That's your responsibility, not mine." End of story. The silence after that? Deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. My mom tried to change the subject. Dad coughed uncomfortably, and my sister stormed out, muttering about how money changes people. But I knew this was just the beginning of a long, ugly battle. Because if you've ever dealt with someone who feels entitled, you know that one no doesn't stop them. It only makes them fight harder. And fight she did. After that dinner, I thought maybe my sister would cool down. Maybe she'd realize she was being unreasonable. I mean, how could anyone seriously expect their sibling to pay off their mortgage indefinitely? But no, if anything, she doubled down. The text started the very next morning. "You need to think about family, not just yourself. I can't believe you'd let your own sister risk losing her house while you sit comfortably in your apartment. If you don't step up, you'll regret it when Mom and Dad take my side." It was like waking up to a barrage of guilt bombs every single day. And if I didn't respond, she'd rope Mom into it, who would call me with that heavy sigh in her voice, saying, "She's under a lot of pressure, honey. Maybe you could help just for now." But just for now has a way of stretching into forever. I tried explaining again that helping someone doesn't mean becoming their personal ATM, that my hard work and savings weren't hers to claim. But logic never stands a chance against entitlement. Things really exploded at Dad's birthday party. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, cake candles, a few jokes about getting older. Instead, my sister decided it was the perfect stage to air our dirty laundry. She stood up, right there in front of the cake, and announced, "Everyone should know that my brother refuses to help me keep my home. I've begged him, I've pleaded, but he's too selfish. Imagine having a sibling who would rather watch you go homeless than share a fraction of what he earns." I swear, the room froze. Forks clinked against plates. Dad looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I took a deep breath, because if I'd raised my voice, that would have been the headline of the night. "Ungrateful brother yells at poor struggling sister." Instead, I said calmly, "Sis, let's be clear, you're not going homeless. You have options. You can downsize. You can rent out a room. You can budget. But you want me to take on your financial responsibility, and that's not happening." She gasped like I'd just slapped her. "Wow. Wow. You really think you're better than me, don't you?" And then she turned to the room like she was rallying troops for a war. "See? This is what money does. It makes people arrogant. It makes them cruel. In Storia One. My Bia Wanstarm." The tension was unbearable. People started muttering, shifting in their seats, pretending to check their phones. Grandma, once again, sat quietly, her eyes never leaving mine. She didn't say a word, but somehow, her silence was louder than all of my sister's accusation. After the party, I got a long Facebook post dedicated to me. Oh yes, she took it public. She wrote about how her heartless brother had abandoned her in her time of need, how she was facing losing everything, while I hoarded wealth. And of course, she tagged half the family and a few of her friends for good measure. The comments were brutal. People I barely knew were calling me greedy, heartless, even soulless. Some even suggested I was jealous of her because she had a house and I didn't. That one made me laugh. Jealous? Of debt? Of stress? Of being one paycheck away from foreclosure? No, thank you. I wanted to clap back online, but I stopped myself. Fighting on Facebook never solves anything, it just makes the mess bigger. Instead, I saved every screenshot, every single accusation, every lie. I had a feeling I'd need them later, and I was right. Because a few weeks later, things took an even uglier turn. See, what my sister didn't realize was that Grandma had quietly been watching everything. And Grandma, our sweet, wise, no-nonsense grandmother, wasn't one to be fooled by drama. She called me one evening and said in her calm voice, "Come by tomorrow, we need to talk." When Grandma said we need to talk, you didn't argue. I showed up the next day, and she already had tea ready. She sat me down at her kitchen table and slid a folder across to me. Inside? Documents, bank records, a copy of the will. "I've been reviewing the estate," she said softly. "Your mother and I are co-trustees. And I want you to understand something, your sister's behavior isn't just unfair to you. It's dangerous to the family's future." My jaw nearly dropped. I had no idea Grandma had been keeping such close tabs. But she had everything. Statements showing how my sister had been mismanaging money, late fees stacking up, even frivolous purchases that proved she wasn't as desperate as she claimed. Designer bags, spa trips, expensive electronics. She hadn't lost her house because of bad luck, she was losing it because she refused to live within her means. And here's where things shifted. Grandma, in her steady measured tone, said, "If she keeps going down this path, she'll drain everyone she can. And I won't allow her to drag you down with her. It's time we put boundaries in place." Boundaries. That word felt like oxygen. For the first time, I realized I wasn't crazy for saying no. I wasn't cruel, or selfish, or arrogant. I was setting boundaries against someone who thought family meant unconditional financial support. That night, I left Grandma's house with a folder full of evidence and a new sense of resolve. I wasn't just defending my wallet anymore. I was defending my future. And if my sister thought she could shame me into submission, she had no idea what was coming next. After that night at Grandma's, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. For weeks, I'd been carrying this guilt, this heavy, suffocating sense that maybe I was the bad guy for refusing to help my sister. But Grandma's words, and those documents, gave me something stronger than guilt. They gave me clarity. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. It was about protecting myself from being dragged into a financial sinkhole that wasn't mine to fix. Still, my sister wasn't done. If anything, she escalated. The next week, she called me out of the blue. No hello, no small talk, just straight to the point. "You're going to regret this," she snapped. "Do you know what foreclosure does to a family name? Do you know how embarrassing it'll be for mom and dad when people find out their daughter lost her home while her brother just sat back and watched?" Her voice dripped with venom, like she wasn't just asking for help, she was trying to weaponize shame. I stayed calm. "Sis, I'm not responsible for your mortgage. You bought a house beyond your means. That was your choice. And now, You have to deal with the consequences. She scoffed. Unbelievable. You think you're so high and mighty just because you have a decent paycheck. But let me tell you something, you owe me. After everything I've done for you over the years, you owe me. That word owe hit me like a slap. Owe her? I thought back to childhood. To all the times she teased me, dumped chores on me, borrowed money she never repaid. Sure, she was my sister, and there were moments of kindness mixed in. But owe? No. What she really meant was, you exist, therefore you owe me. I ended the call before my temper got the best of me. But she wasn't finished. She showed up at Mom's house a few days later while I was there helping with yard work. She stormed into the backyard like a hurricane, waving a stack of overdue bills in my face. Look at this, she shouted. Do you think I can handle this on my own? Do you think I should just let the bank take my home while you sit there polishing your little savings account? I held my ground. Those are your bills, not mine. Her eyes narrowed. Fine. If you won't help me voluntarily, maybe I'll take it up with the family trust. Maybe Grandma will see things differently. Thank you for watching and again play Dio. What am I Caitlin the Raider and so frun? And that's when I knew she had no idea what Grandma and I had already discussed. I didn't say a word. I just let her storm off, muttering threats under her breath. That night, Grandma called again. She's pushing harder, isn't she? Like a bulldozer. I sighed. Grandma chuckled softly. Well, bulldozers can be stopped. I think it's time we prepare ourselves. If she tries to come after the trust, we'll be ready. And ready we were. The social media war. If family dinners and backyard blow-ups weren't enough, my sister decided to take things nuclear. Social media round 2. This time, she posted pictures of her house, dramatically captioned with, soon to be gone because my brother refuses to help. Family is supposed to mean something. She even added a crying selfie for effect. The comments rolled in again. Some people comforted her, others vilified me. Your brother sounds awful. How can he sleep at night? I'd never abandon my family like that. I stayed quiet, but once again, I screenshotted everything. Why? Because I knew that when entitlement gets this loud, it's not just noise. It's a warning. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got an email. Not from her. From a lawyer. Apparently, my sister had tried to petition for an early release of funds from the family estate, claiming hardship, claiming it was, in the best interest of the family. She thought she could bypass me, but what she didn't count on was Grandma being 2 steps ahead. When I called Grandma in a panic, she was calm as ever. Don't worry. I've already spoken to our attorney. She won't get a dime without both trustees' signatures. And I'll never sign without your agreement. Relief washed over me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't fighting this alone. Drawing the line. The next family gathering was Easter Sunday. Everyone was there: Mom, Dad, cousins, even a few distant relatives who only show up for free food. And of course, my sister. I knew it was coming. The public showdown. Halfway through dinner, she stood up, voice dripping with theatrical sadness. I want everyone to know what's happening. My own brother is letting me drown. He refuses to help. He's letting the bank take my home. Eyes turned to me. Forks hovered midair. I stood too, calmly. I didn't raise my voice, didn't snap. I just spoke clearly. Sis, I've told you this before. Your mortgage is your responsibility, not mine. I've worked hard for my savings, and I won't be bullied into paying your debts. Gasps echoed. She sputtered. Bullied? You think I'm bullying you? Yes, I said firmly. Posting about me online, calling me selfish in front of the family, trying to weaponize guilt, that's bullying. And I won't stand for it. The room went dead silent. Even Mom, who usually tried to smooth things over, didn't say a word. Dad shifted uncomfortably but stayed quiet. And Grandma? She gave the faintest nod of approval. For once, the spotlight turned back on my sister. And without an audience cheering her on, her theatrics fell flat. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, the war had shifted. The turning point. Weeks passed. The texts slowed. The calls got shorter. The posts dried up. I think my sister finally realized that no matter how loud she got, I wasn't budging. And then, one morning, I got a quiet text from her. I got a job. It's not great, but it's something. I'll figure the rest out. No apology. No acknowledgement of the chaos she'd caused. Just that. But honestly, that was enough. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about me wanting her to fail. I never wanted that. I just wanted her to take responsibility for her own life, instead of trying to hijack mine. And now, maybe, just maybe, she finally would. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. My sister had found a job, and though she wasn't suddenly rolling in cash, she at least had something steady. I figured maybe she had finally accepted reality that life isn't always fair. That sometimes you have to scale back, downsize, adjust. But here's the thing about entitlement. It doesn't just vanish. It hides, simmers, waits for the next opportunity. And that next opportunity came faster than I expected. The family unity argument. A month after she started her new job, Mom invited everyone over for Sunday dinner. It was meant to be casual spaghetti, garlic bread, and too many desserts nobody needed. But as soon as we sat down, my sister launched right back into her campaign. This time, she didn't attack me directly. Instead, she tried a different tactic. The family unity argument. She looked around the table and said, "I just don't understand how families can sit together like this, enjoying meals and laughter, when some of us are struggling. Isn't family supposed to lift each other up? Isn't that what unity means?" Her words were heavy, deliberate. And though she didn't say my name, every eye flicked to me. I set my fork down and asked calmly, "And what exactly are you suggesting, sis?" She leaned forward, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "That family means sharing. That when one of us has more, we help those who have less. That's the whole point of being related, so we don't have to face hardships alone. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in helping family. I've covered grocery bills before. I've helped with car repairs. I've even floated loans when times were tight. But there's a huge difference between occasional help and being forced into lifelong financial servitude." So I said, "Helping each other doesn't mean taking on someone else's debts. Family unity doesn't mean one person pays while another avoids responsibility." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. Spoken like someone who's never truly struggled. That stung. Because I had struggled. She just didn't know. Or didn't care. About the nights I went hungry during college. The jobs I worked back to make rent. The rejections I swallowed before finally finding stability. But I stayed calm. Struggle doesn't give you the right to demand. It gives you the motivation to adapt. The silence that followed was thick. Mom busied herself with serving more spaghetti. Dad cleared his throat. And Grandma, she sipped her tea, eyes sharp as ever, saying nothing but clearly approving of my stance. The desperation play. 2 weeks later, my sister called again. Her voice was different this time, not angry, not accusatory. Desperate. "I'm behind again," she whispered. "I thought the new job would help. But it's not enough. Please. Just this once. Cover me until I catch up." And I'll admit, for a second, my resolve wavered. Her voice cracked, and I could hear genuine fear. Nobody likes the thought of losing their home. But then I remembered the bank statements Grandma showed me. The designer bags, the spa trips, the expensive electronics. My sister wasn't drowning because of bad luck, she was drowning because she refused to change her lifestyle. So I said softly, "I'm sorry. I can't do that." Her tone hardened instantly. "You won't do that. Don't pretend it's about principles. You're just selfish." Click. She hung up. And I realized something important. Every time I drew a boundary, she just tried a new strategy. Anger, guilt, public shaming, now desperation. She was running out of cards, but she wasn't ready to fold. Grandma's final lesson. One evening, Grandma invited me over again. She didn't mention my sister, just said, "Come by, bring your appetite." I arrived to find her kitchen filled with the smell of roast chicken. We ate, laughed, and for a while, I forgot about all the drama. But after dessert, she grew quiet. "You know," she said, "family doesn't always mean what we want it to mean. Sometimes, family teaches us the hardest lessons of all. That ways then interrogaut, and they work with the dater. Wise they were durning." I nodded, waiting. She leaned closer, her voice steady. "The lesson here isn't about money, it's about dignity. Your sister lost hers when she started demanding instead of asking. And you keep yours by refusing to give in." Her words sank deep. Because that was it, wasn't it? It wasn't about a mortgage. It wasn't about numbers on a bill. It was about dignity, mine, hers, and what happens when entitlement eats away at it. Grandma patted my hand. "Don't let her shame take root in you. Stand firm. The future will remember who held their dignity." I'll never forget that. The fallout. Eventually, reality caught up to my sister. She couldn't keep up with the mortgage, and after months of threats and pleas, the bank finally moved forward. She didn't lose everything, not like she claimed she would. She sold the house before foreclosure hit, took a loss, and moved into a smaller place. And you know what? She survived. All those months of accusing me, shaming me, blaming me, none of it mattered. She found a cheaper home, adjusted her lifestyle, and kept going. And me? I kept my dignity. I kept my savings. I kept my boundaries intact. The relationship between us isn't the same. Maybe it never will be. But I sleep at night knowing I didn't let guilt, or fear, or public opinion control me. Because here's the truth. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong enough to protect yourself from being consumed by someone else's mistakes. And if that lesson came wrapped in family drama, guilt trips and Facebook rants, so be it. When my sister finally sold the house, you'd think that would have been the end of the drama. The mortgage was gone, the constant threats of foreclosure were behind her, and she had a smaller place that she could actually afford. But if you've dealt with someone who feels entitled, you know sometimes the money isn't really the point. Sometimes, it's about control. About testing how far they can push you. And my sister? She wasn't done testing the "I deserve better" speech. The first time I visited her new place, I honestly thought it was nice. Smaller, sure, but cozy. A little townhouse with just enough space for her and her cats. But she greeted me with this deep sigh, like she'd just been handed a prison sentence. "I can't believe this is my life now," she muttered, showing me around. "All because you refused to help me. I had a beautiful home, and now I'm stuck here." I tried to be supportive. "It's still a nice place. And hey, it's manageable. You won't have to stress so much about bills." She shot me a look. "Manageable? That's your way of saying I downgraded. Don't pretend you're not judging me." I wasn't judging, at least. Not in the way she thought. What I was doing was biting my tongue so I didn't say, "You bought a house you couldn't afford. And now you're blaming me for not bailing you out." Instead, I just said, "It's about peace of mind. That's worth more than granite countertops." But she wasn't having it. For the next half hour, she gave me the "I deserve better" speech. How she worked hard too. How life had cheated her. How I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. It was exhausting. And all I could think was, if you put half the energy you use for complaining into adapting, you'd be fine. Mom's attempt to mediate. Not long after that, Mom decided to step in. She invited me over one afternoon and, in that gentle but firm mom tone, said, "Honey, I think you should consider helping your sister in other ways." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Well," Mom said carefully, "maybe not the mortgage. But, what about her car payments? Or her groceries? She's still struggling, you know." I stared at her. "So instead of paying her house bills, I should pay for her car? Or her food? Where does it end, Mom?" She sighed. "I just want peace between you two. It breaks my heart to see the family so divided." And I understood. Mom wasn't malicious, she just wanted harmony. But harmony built on enabling isn't harmony at all. It's silence. And silence never solves the real problem. So I told her, gently but firmly, "Mom, peace doesn't come from me giving in. It comes from her accepting responsibility. I won't bankroll her mistakes." She didn't like hearing it, but she didn't argue. The birthday blow-up. The real breaking point came at Grandma's birthday. We all gathered at her house, balloons, cake, candles, the whole deal. For most of the evening, things went smoothly. We laughed, shared stories, even managed to forget the tension for a while. But then, when it was time for gifts, my sister decided to strike. She handed Grandma a card and said loudly, "I wish I could have gotten you something nicer. But unfortunately, I've been struggling. Unlike some people, I don't have the luxury of ignoring family responsibilities." The room went silent. Everyone knew who she meant. Grandma, bless her, didn't flinch. She just opened the card, smiled, and said, "Thank you, dear." But I'd had enough. I stood and said clearly, "If you're going to keep using every occasion to attack me, then I won't be coming to these gatherings anymore." Gasps echoed. My sister's eyes widened. "So you're just going to abandon the family? Again? Hey to election being makes today. Which say ard and anyone." "No," I said firmly. "I'm refusing to be your punching bag." Grandma set down her card and looked right at my sister. Her voice was calm, but sharp as a knife. "Enough," she said. "You've made your choices. He's made his. Stop dragging the rest of us into it." And just like that, the conversation ended. Quiet after the storm. After that night, things quieted down. My sister still made little comments here and there, but the open attacks stopped. Maybe because Grandma had spoken, maybe because she realized no one was buying her story anymore. She kept her smaller house. She kept her job. She learned, slowly, to live within her means. And me? I finally felt free. Free from the guilt. Free from the constant accusations. Free from the endless cycle of being blamed for choices I didn't make. Reflection. Looking back now, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about boundaries. About standing firm when someone tried to twist love and family into an excuse for control. Because the truth is, you can care about someone deeply and still say no. You can love your family and still refuse to let them drain you. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their own actions, because only then will they truly learn. You'd think the whole saga with the mortgage, the family blow-ups, and Grandma's firm stance would have put everything to rest. For a little while, It actually did. Life settled into something resembling normal. My sister adjusted to her smaller home. I focused on my own goals. And family dinners no longer felt like walking into a courtroom. But here's the thing. When someone's used to leaning on you, the habit doesn't disappear overnight. It creeps back in, little by little, disguised as small favors. The slippery slope of little things. It started innocently enough. A text here, a call there. Can you cover dinner tonight? I'm a little short. When their size to a metter dason that her. Mind spotting me gas money? Payday's still a few days out. The cat's vet bill came up unexpectedly. Could you lend me $100? They weren't big asks, not compared to a mortgage. And for a while, I said yes. Because saying no to a massive lifelong financial drain felt justified. But saying no to dinner? That felt petty. But the problem with giving in, even for small things, is that it reopens the door. Before long, those small requests turned into something bigger. One day, she called and said, "Hey, I'm behind on my credit card. Just one payment, that's all I need. You can help with that, right?" And that's when I stopped. Because suddenly, I was right back where we started, being pressured into solving financial problems that weren't mine. Drawing the line again, I told her gently but firmly, "Sis, I can't keep doing this. I've helped in small ways, but if I cover one credit card bill, what's next? Another? Then your car? Then your utilities? Where does it stop?" She sighed heavily. "It stops when I'm back on my feet. Don't you get it? This isn't forever." But the thing is, it had been forever. At least, that's how it felt. From the moment she lost her job to the house fiasco, to the guilt trips at family events, to now, it was always something. So I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't." Her silence on the other end was deafening. Finally she muttered, "You've changed." And maybe she was right. I had changed. I wasn't the sibling who would cave to pressure anymore. I wasn't the one who confused guilt with responsibility. The cousin confrontation, as if things weren't tense enough, one of our cousins decided to jump in. At a barbecue, he pulled me aside and said, "Man, I don't get it. You've got the means. Why not just help her out? That's what family does." I looked him straight in the eye and asked, "Would you pay her bills if she asked you?" He hesitated. "Well, no, but..." "Exactly," I cut in. "You wouldn't, because it's not your responsibility. And it's not mine either." He didn't have much to say after that. But it reminded me how entitlement doesn't just affect you, it drags in everyone around you. Suddenly, you're not just defending yourself against one person, you're defending yourself against the idea that family obligations mean endless sacrifice. Grandma's quiet support. Through it all, Grandma remained my anchor. She didn't interfere, didn't lecture, didn't pressure. Instead, she'd call sometimes just to check in. "How are you holding up?" she'd ask in her calm, measured voice. I'd sigh. "Tired of being the villain. There, not it stands playing too great." "You're not the villain," she'd say. "You're just the one brave enough to say no." Those words meant more than she'll ever know. Because when the rest of the family wavered, when friends online joined the chorus against me, Grandma's steady belief kept me grounded. The final blow-up. Eventually, my sister realized her tactics weren't working. One night, after I refused to cover yet another emergency, she exploded over the phone. "You're dead to me," she spat. "I don't have a brother anymore." The words stung, but only for a moment, because deep down, I knew she didn't mean them. What she meant was, "You're not giving me what I want, and I can't handle it." Still, I let her words hang there. I didn't fight back. I didn't try to repair it. I simply said, "If that's how you feel, I'm sorry," and I hung up. Peace at last. For the first time in years, the calls stopped. The texts dried up. The social media posts disappeared. Was the silence sad? In a way, yes. But it was also peaceful, because sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing a relationship, it comes from stepping away from the chaos. And as I sat in my own home that night, sipping coffee and staring at the quiet glow of the city outside my window, I realized something important. Protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And if saying no cost me my sister's approval, then maybe that was the price I had to pay for freedom. For a few weeks after that final blow-up, life was quiet. Almost too quiet. No calls, no texts, no Facebook rants. At first, I felt uneasy, like the calm before a storm, but then the days stretched into weeks. And I realized this wasn't just a break. This was distance. And with distance came clarity. Rediscovering my own life. When you're wrapped up in someone else's chaos, you don't notice how much of your own life gets put on hold. I hadn't realized how often I checked my phone, dreading the next angry message. How many family gatherings I attended with knots in my stomach. How much mental space I gave to defending myself against accusations that weren't even true. Now, with silence, I started to breathe again. I went back to the gym regularly. I picked up hobbies I'd neglected, like cooking actual meals instead of ordering takeout. I even started traveling a little. Something I'd been hesitant to do when I thought every trip might end with me coming home to another family crisis. It felt like getting pieces of myself back. The whisper campaign. Of course, silence didn't mean my sister was done. I found out through the grapevine cousins, family friends, that she was still telling her version of the story. Not online anymore, but in quieter conversations. She'd paint herself as the victim, me as the cold-hearted brother who abandoned her. At first, it bothered me. Nobody likes being cast as the villain in their own family. But then I realized something. The people who mattered already knew the truth. Grandma knew. My parents, even if they didn't say it outright, knew deep down. And honestly, anyone who'd watched the whole saga unfold could see what was really happening. The whispers lost their power once I stopped letting them in. A shift in family gatherings. When I did show up for family dinners again, something had changed. My sister was there. But the energy was different. No more dramatic speeches. No more confrontations. She stuck to neutral topics: work, her cats, random TV shows. At first, I thought it was just an act. But over time, I realized maybe she was learning. Maybe, without me to push against, she'd been forced to face reality on her own. That didn't mean we were close again. Far from it. Our relationship was polite, at best. Civil. But sometimes, civil is enough. Lessons in boundaries. Here's the biggest thing I learned from all of this. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're fences that mark where your yard ends, and someone else's begins. Before, I thought saying no meant shutting my sister out. I thought it meant abandoning her, but what it really meant was protecting my own space, so I could actually have something to give when I chose to not, when it was demanded of me. Boundaries gave me back control. And interestingly enough, once I set them, other people in the family started to follow. Mom stopped covering for my sister's late bills. Dad quietly refused a loan request. Even a cousin admitted to me, "You know, after watching how you handled her, I finally told her no too." And it felt good. It was like my refusal gave everyone else permission to stop being doormats. A surprise conversation. Months later, I got a call I didn't expect. It was my sister. Her voice was calmer than I'd heard in years. "Hey," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say, I get it now. About the house. About everything. You were right." I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so." Another part wanted to jump at the apology, to rebuild things right away. But I just said, "I appreciate you saying that." There was a pause. Then she added, "I'm figuring things out on my own now. It's not easy. But it feels better. More real." For the first time, I heard something in her voice that had been missing all along. Accountability. The takeaway. Looking back, the whole ordeal feels like a storm I barely made it through. But I came out stronger. I learned that family love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. That guilt isn't the same as responsibility. And that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall because it's the only way they'll learn to stand. And maybe the biggest lesson of all, when you say no, the world doesn't end. In fact, sometimes, it's the only way to find peace. After that phone call, the one where my sister admitted she finally got it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. For years, it had been a cycle of guilt trips, arguments, and family drama. Now, at least on the surface, there was acceptance. But acceptance doesn't erase history. And it doesn't automatically repair trust. The fragile peace. When you've been through as many battles as we had, even peace feels fragile. At family dinners, my sister and I were cordial, but never warm. We'd exchange polite small talk: weather, work, cats, but we both knew there was an invisible line we didn't dare cross. And honestly, that was fine with me, because peace doesn't always mean hugging it out and pretending nothing happened. Sometimes, peace means putting down the weapons and just not firing anymore. Mom's hope. Of course, Mom being Mom. She hoped for more. One evening she pulled me aside after dinner and said, "I can tell you two are speaking again. That makes me so happy. Maybe soon you'll be close like you used to be." I shook my head gently. "Mom, we were never really that close. We just tolerated each other better before money got involved." Her face fell. "But your siblings. Blood should mean something." I sighed. "It does. But blood doesn't erase choices. It doesn't erase entitlement. I can forgive, but that doesn't mean I forget." Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Mom didn't push, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She wanted a happy ending. But real life doesn't always hand you those. A lesson in trust. Trust is fragile. Once it breaks, it doesn't snap back into place like a rubber band. It takes time, effort, and consistency to rebuild. And my sister? She wasn't putting in that effort. Sure, she wasn't attacking me anymore. But she also wasn't apologizing, wasn't acknowledging the damage she'd done. It was like she wanted us to just skip to the "everything's fine now" chapter without writing the pages in between. But I couldn't do that, so I kept my guard up. Civil, but cautious. The job change. A few months later, she called to tell me she'd gotten a new job. A better one. Higher pay, more stability. For the first time, I heard genuine excitement in her voice. "I think things are finally turning around," she said. And I believed her. Maybe this really was the shift she needed. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Of course, it'll take me a while to catch up on debts. You know how it is." That little part made my stomach clench. Because I knew what it meant. The door was cracked open again. She was setting the stage for another ask. I responded carefully. "I'm glad things are looking up. I know you'll figure it out. When they don't now," and that was it. No offers. No openings. Just a gentle nudge back toward self-reliance. Grandma's perspective. Around that time, I visited Grandma again. She was sitting on the porch, sipping tea, watching the world go by the way only she could. "She told me about the new job," Grandma said. "That's good news." I nodded. "It is. But I can't shake the feeling she's still waiting for me to swoop in." Grandma smiled knowingly. Entitlement doesn't vanish overnight. But sometimes, life has a way of teaching what words can't. She's learning slowly. Let her. Her words reminded me that growth isn't linear. My sister wasn't going to flip a switch and suddenly become accountable. But maybe, with time and enough lessons, she'd get there. Reflection on boundaries. I've realized something important through all of this. Boundaries don't just protect you. They teach others how to treat you. Every time I stood firm, every time I said no, I was teaching my sister that I wouldn't be manipulated. That guilt wouldn't work. That shouting in public wouldn't bend me. And slowly, those lessons started to sink in. Closing thoughts. For now. By this point in the story, the storm had passed. My sister was working again, living in her smaller home, and slowly learning to adjust. The family wasn't divided anymore, not entirely anyway. And I finally had the peace I'd been craving. But here's the truth. Peace doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean trust is fully restored or relationships are magically healed. Sometimes, peace is just the absence of war. And that's enough. Because in the end, family drama doesn't disappear with one victory. It lingers, reshapes, waits for another chance. But as long as I hold my boundaries, as long as I remember the lessons I've learned, I'll be ready. Time has a way of smoothing even the roughest edges. Months passed, and with them, the rawness of all those fights, the family showdowns, the public Facebook rants, they started to fade into memory. But memory is tricky. It doesn't just hold on to the details, it holds on to the feelings. And even though my sister and I had reached some kind of fragile peace, the feelings never fully went away. Rebuilding, or just existing, our relationship settled into this weird middle ground. We weren't enemies anymore. But we weren't close either. It was like we were two neighbors who waved politely over the fence but never really crossed into each other's yard. She'd text occasionally about neutral things. "Did you see that show on Netflix? Grandma's garden looks amazing this year. The cats destroyed my curtains again." Small talk. Safe talk. And honestly, I was okay with that. Because safe talk meant we weren't fighting. Safe talk meant there were no demands, no guilt trips, no explosions. But it also meant we weren't really repairing anything. We were just existing side by side. Mom's optimism. Mom, ever the optimist, still hoped for a true reconciliation. One evening she said, "I know things have been hard, but I think you two are turning a corner. Maybe soon you'll be back to how you were as kids." I smiled faintly. "Mom, we fought like cats and dogs as kids too, don't you remember?" She laughed, but her eyes were wistful. "Yes, but there was love in those fights. I just want to see that again." I didn't have the heart to tell her that love and entitlement are two different things. That trust broken in adulthood is harder to patch than sibling squabbles in childhood. So I just nodded. Grandma's grounded view. Grandma, on the other hand, was as practical as ever. "You don't need to force a relationship," she told me one afternoon. "Sometimes family ties are meant to be loose. What matters is respect. If you both have that, the rest will find its level." They could now ace. It was classic grandma wise, steady, no sugarcoating. And she was right. For the first time, I wasn't trying to fix my sister. I wasn't trying to change her, or bend for her, or win her over. I was just respecting the boundary between us. Signs of growth. Surprisingly, I did start to notice changes in her. Small ones, but real. She stopped complaining about bills all the time. She started talking more about work, about projects, co-workers, even frustrations that sounded normal instead of desperate. She mentioned budgeting apps, cutting expenses, and once she even bragged about paying off a chunk of her credit card. It wasn't a miracle transformation, but it was progress, and part of me wondered maybe standing my ground had forced her to grow in ways she never would have otherwise. A test of boundaries. Of course, life has a funny way of testing you right when you start to feel comfortable. One evening she called and said, "So, I'm thinking about upgrading my car. Mine's getting old, and the dealership has a good financing deal." I froze. Because I could hear the trap forming. A new car meant new debt. New debt meant new stress. And new stress often meant new demands. I answered carefully. "That's a big decision. Just make sure you can handle the payments." "Who has Manning and Tinnitus?" She paused. "Well, yeah, I mean, I might need a little help at the beginning, but after that, I'll be fine." And there it was, the old pattern. Creeping back in. This time, I didn't let it slide. "Sis, if you can't afford the payments on your own, then don't do it. I'm not getting involved." Silence. Heavy silence. Then a short, clipped, "Fine." The call ended quickly after that. Holding the line. I won't lie, part of me felt guilty again. Like I was the bad guy for refusing to help. But I reminded myself, helping isn't the same as enabling. If I'd said yes, I'd have been right back in the old cycle. And the truth is, she needed that no more than she needed the money. Because every time I held the line, she was forced to adjust. Forced to think twice. Forced to realize the only person who could truly change her situation was herself. Reflection. By now, I'd learned something I wish I'd known years ago. Love without boundaries turns into resentment. And resentment destroys relationships faster than distance ever could. I loved my sister. In my own way. But I loved my peace too. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to choose between them. I could have both, if I just kept my boundaries strong. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to learn that lesson too. By this point in the story, things had settled into a rhythm. Not a perfect rhythm. Not the kind where everyone smiles at the dinner table and laughs like nothing ever happened, but a rhythm nonetheless. My sister and I weren't fighting anymore. We weren't close either. We were stable. But stability, when you've been through chaos, feels like a luxury. Learning to trust the quiet. After years of constant conflict, the quiet felt suspicious. Like I was just waiting for the next shoe to drop. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from her, I braced myself, half expecting another demand, another guilt trip, another round of manipulation. But more often than not, the texts were normal. "Grandma's flowers are blooming. You should come see them. Do you have the recipe for that pasta Mom used to make? Netflix finally dropped that documentary you mentioned." Nothing heavy, nothing toxic. Just everyday conversation. And slowly, I started to let my guard down, at least a little. The family's shift. Interestingly, I noticed the rest of the family adjusting too. My mom stopped pressuring me to help just this once. My dad, who usually stayed silent, began quietly backing me up in conversations. Even cousins who used to side-eye me when my sister complained, now seemed to understand my point of view. It was like everyone had realized that enabling her wasn't love, it was poison. And the antidote wasn't more money. It was boundaries. A test at Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving rolled around. And with it came the first real test of this new fragile peace. We were all gathered around Grandma's long dining table, the smell of turkey and stuffing filling the room. My sister sat across from me, chatting politely with cousins, not once bringing up money or debts. It was almost surreal. But as dinner went on, she cleared her throat and said, "You know, I've been thinking about maybe going back to school, getting a degree, something stable. But of course, tuition isn't cheap." There it was. A baited line, tossed into the middle of the table. All eyes flicked to me. I calmly took a sip of water, set my glass down and said, "That sounds like a great idea. I'm sure you'll find a way to make it work." Silence. Then Grandma smiled faintly. Dad nodded. And just like that, the moment passed. For the first time, I didn't feel attacked. I didn't feel pressured. I just felt free. The quiet apology. A week later, my sister called. No drama, no raised voice, just quiet words. I realize what I said at Thanksgiving sounded like I was hinting. I wasn't trying to put it on you. I don't always think before I speak. It wasn't a full apology. Not for the years of chaos and accusations. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough. I told her, "I appreciate you saying that." And in that moment, I realized. Maybe she was learning. Slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly but learning. Reflection on growth. Boundaries don't just change you. They change the people around you. By refusing to carry her burdens, I forced her to carry them herself. And while it wasn't easy, it was necessary. Because responsibility isn't something you can outsource. You can try. But eventually, life hands it back to you. And watching her start to accept that, even in small ways, felt like the first real step toward healing, not just for her, but for our relationship. Closing the chapter. Looking back now, the whole ordeal feels like a book I never wanted to read but couldn't put down. It was messy, painful, sometimes even humiliating. But it taught me lessons I'll carry forever. That no is a complete sentence. That love without boundaries becomes exploitation. That guilt is not the same as responsibility. And that sometimes, the best way to help someone, is to stop helping them. My sister and I aren't perfect. We may never be. But we've both grown in our own ways. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Time passed, and the storm that once consumed my family life slowly became a memory. My sister and I weren't back to being best friends, but we were no longer enemies either. And for me, that was enough. But here's the truth about family. Just when you think you've turned the last page of a chapter, a new one has a way of sneaking up on you. A new kind of challenge. One evening, I got a call from my sister. Not frantic, not demanding, just tired. "Hey," she said softly. "I've been offered a promotion at work. But it means longer hours, more responsibility. And I'm not sure I can handle it." This wasn't about money. This was about fear. Fear of failure. Fear of stretching herself too thin. Fear of change. And for the first time in years, she wasn't asking me for cash. She was asking me for advice. I paused, realizing how big that shift was. "Well," I said carefully, "you don't have to decide right away. But remember, growth always feels uncomfortable at first. That doesn't mean you can't do it." She was quiet. Then she whispered, "Thanks. That actually helps." The power of a different kind of help. That moment stuck with me. Because it showed me something important. Not all help looks the same. Sometimes, helping means saying no to financial bailouts. Other times, helping means offering encouragement, listening, or just reminding someone of their own strength. For years, she had equated help with money. And I had equated help with being taken advantage of. But now, for the first time, we'd found a middle ground. Family dynamics shifting. At the next family gathering, I noticed the difference. My sister wasn't sulking or making side comments anymore. She was talking about her job, her goals, even a new project she was excited about. The rest of the family picked up on it too. Mom looked relieved. Dad smiled more. Grandma, as always, stayed quiet. But her eyes sparkled with that knowing pride she carried whenever she saw growth in her grandchildren. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments. Unspoken history lingering between us. But the energy was lighter. Reflection on growth. Here's the thing about family drama. It never completely disappears. It leaves scars, memories, things you don't forget. But scars don't have to define you. They can remind you of battles survived, lessons learned, and the strength you never knew you had. My sister's growth wasn't just hers, it was mine too. Because learning to say no taught me how to value my own peace. And learning to separate financial enabling from emotional support taught me how to love in a healthier way. Grandma's final reminder. One afternoon, I was sitting with Grandma on her porch when she said something I'll never forget. "You know, families aren't meant to be perfect," she said, sipping her tea. "They're meant to teach us. Sometimes the lessons are painful. But those lessons make us who we are." I nodded, letting her words sink in. "And you," she added, "have learned one of the hardest lessons of all. That love isn't about giving everything. It's about giving wisely." That sentence has echoed in my mind ever since. Closing thoughts for this chapter. By now, my story with my sister had shifted from battles over money to lessons about boundaries, growth, and what it really means to be family. We weren't the picture-perfect siblings Mom dreamed of. But we were learning. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. Because sometimes the best stories don't end with everyone holding hands around the dinner table. Sometimes they end with quiet respect, a fragile truce, and the hope that tomorrow will be a little better than yesterday. As the months rolled on, I started noticing something I hadn't seen in years. My sister was calmer, not perfect, not magically transformed into a saint, but calmer. The drama that once dominated every family gathering was fading into the background. She wasn't making digs at me anymore, wasn't trying to embarrass me in front of relatives, wasn't flooding my phone with demands. And in that quiet, I started to reflect on just how far we'd come. The weight that lifted. When you carry someone else's problems for too long, you don't realize how heavy they've become until you finally put them down. For years, I thought stress and guilt were just part of being a good brother. That family loyalty meant sacrificing peace, savings, even dignity. But the truth is, once I stepped back and held my boundaries, I realized just how much lighter life could be. I had more energy, more focus, more room for things that actually mattered: my own career, my friendships, even simple joys like going for a run without feeling like my phone might explode with drama at any second. The shift in conversations. Our conversations changed too. Instead of revolving around bills, debt, or what I owed her, they became human. She'd call to talk about her job, about the coworker who drove her crazy, or the project she was proud of finishing. She'd send me pictures of her cats curled up in the sun, or memes that made her laugh. It wasn't deep bonding, but it was normal. And after everything we'd been through, normal felt like a gift. Mom's relief. Mom noticed too. One evening she called me and said, "I don't know what happened, but I'm just so grateful you two aren't at each other's throats anymore." I smiled. Boundaries happened, Mom. That's what changed. She didn't fully understand. She still believed family should mean unlimited sacrifice. But she couldn't deny the results. Peace in the family. A calmer daughter. A son who wasn't constantly on edge, and in her own way, that was enough for her. Dad's quiet words. Dad, who rarely spoke up in all the chaos, surprised me one afternoon. We were standing outside after mowing Grandma's lawn when he said, "You did the right thing. You know, with your sister. If you hadn't stood your ground, she'd have dragged you under with her." It was the closest thing to validation I'd ever gotten from him on the subject. And it meant more than I could say. Grandma's wisdom one more time. And of course, there was Grandma. I sat with her one late summer evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She sipped her tea, then said, "You know what I admire most about you? You didn't let bitterness take root. You set your boundaries, but you didn't harden your heart." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. I hadn't stopped loving my sister. I hadn't cut her off completely, or wished her harm. I'd just stopped letting her mistakes become my responsibility, and in doing so, I'd kept my compassion intact without losing myself. Reflection. By now, I realized something important. Family doesn't mean endless giving. It doesn't mean becoming a martyr. It means caring in ways that are healthy, sustainable, and honest. For years, my sister thought love equaled money. That being a good brother meant paying her bills. But now, slowly, she was learning that love could mean encouragement, advice, or simply showing up without drama. And I was learning too. Learning that saying no doesn't make you cruel, it makes you capable of loving in a healthier way. Closing thoughts. By the time this chapter of our story wound down, I knew one thing for certain. Peace wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about magically erasing years of conflict. It was about creating space where growth could happen. And maybe, just maybe, that was what we both needed all along. By the time another year rolled around, it almost felt like the storm between my sister and me had been a bad dream. The shouting matches, the Facebook rants, the endless guilt trips, they were all fading into the rearview mirror. But here's the funny thing about healing. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in layers. And sometimes, just when you think everything's finally calm, life tosses one more test in your path. A new crisis on the horizon. It happened in the spring. My sister called me one evening, her voice trembling, not with anger this time, but with something else. Fear. "There's been cutbacks at work," she said. "They're letting people go. I don't know if my job is safe." Instantly, my chest tightened. We'd been here before. Job loss had been the spark that ignited years of chaos between us. I braced myself, waiting for the inevitable. The ask, but to my surprise, it didn't come. Instead, she said, "I don't want to panic. I needed to tell someone." That was it. No demands, no guilt trips, just honesty. The difference this time, in the past, a crisis meant she'd turn to me like I was her personal safety net. This time, she simply wanted support. And that small difference meant everything. I told her, "Whatever happens, you'll figure it out. You've been doing better, and I know you can handle this." There was a pause, and then she whispered, "Thanks. That means more than you know." It was such a shift from the sister who once waved overdue bills in my face, who once declared me dead to her for refusing to pay her mortgage. And in that moment, I realized just how much she had grown. Family observations. At the next family dinner, I noticed the change too. My sister wasn't sulking or hinting about money anymore. Instead, she talked about updating her resume, networking, and saving more aggressively, just in case. Even Mom seemed stunned. She shot me a glance across the table, her eyes wide with quiet relief, as if to say, "Is this really happening?" And Grandma, ever the observer, simply nodded approvingly. Reflection on resilience. Here's the thing about struggle. It either breaks you, or it makes you stronger. For years, I worried my sister would never learn. that she'd always expect someone else to save her. But slowly, through setbacks and boundaries, she was discovering resilience, and in a way, I was too. Because holding the line against her demands hadn't just taught her lessons, it had taught me resilience as well. Resilience in the face of guilt, criticism, and pressure. Resilience to trust my own instincts even when the whole family seemed to side against me. A conversation with Grandma. Later that week, I visited Grandma again. Sitting on her porch, the spring breeze warm against our skin, she said, "I've seen her change. She still has a long way to go, but she's different now." I nodded. "She really is. And honestly, I never thought we'd get here." Grandma smiled. "That's the thing about life. People surprise us. Sometimes for worse, sometimes for better. But they surprise us." I let her words sink in. Because she was right. My sister had been the source of so much pain, but now, slowly, she was becoming a source of hope. Closing thoughts. As I look back on everything, the fights, the betrayals, the guilt trips, the moments of silence, and now the fragile steps toward growth, I realize this story isn't about villains and heroes. It's about people. Flawed, messy, complicated people trying to figure out how to love each other without losing themselves in the process. And maybe, just maybe, that's what family really is. Not perfect harmony, but the constant, sometimes painful, process of learning where love ends and responsibility begins. Spring turned into summer, and with it came a new kind of rhythm in our family. For the first time in years, gatherings didn't feel like battlefields. My sister wasn't picking fights, I wasn't walking on eggshells, and the tension that once hovered like a storm cloud over every dinner had begun to lift. But healing, as I'd learned, isn't a straight line. It's more like a winding road, full of detours and speed bumps. And just when you think you're cruising smoothly, life throws another test in your path. The promotion. By midsummer, my sister's fears about layoffs had turned into something completely different. Opportunity. She called one night, her voice buzzing with excitement. "You won't believe this," she said. "They're offering me the promotion. Bigger salary. Benefits. A real shot at moving up." I could hear the joy. But underneath it, I also heard hesitation. "But," she continued, "it's a lot. More hours, more pressure. And honestly, I'm scared I'll mess it up." This time, she wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even asking for me to fix anything. She was just asking for reassurance. So I told her the truth. Every big step feels scary at first. But you've come this far. Don't sell yourself short now. There was a pause, and then she said quietly, "Thanks. I needed to hear that. We have to act discreet in the deck. From Morse 2 and 2000 by on the deck." For once, my role wasn't the family bank. It was the brother she could lean on for words, not dollars. And it felt good. The shift in our dynamic. That conversation marked a turning point. Our dynamic was different now. Less about battles, more about cautious trust. She'd still vent about bills or stress, but the tone had shifted. She wasn't laying them at my feet anymore. She was simply sharing, the way siblings are supposed to. And in return, I found myself listening more, encouraging her where I could, but always mindful of my boundaries. I wasn't responsible for saving her, but I could still care. Family dinner, revisited. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around again, the atmosphere was almost unrecognizable from the year before. We sat around the table, and instead of accusations or guilt trips, my sister proudly talked about projects at work. About how she'd managed to pay off one of her smaller debts. About her plans to finally start a savings account. The pride in Mom's eyes was unmistakable. Dad smiled quietly, nodding along. And Grandma, who had watched every storm from her quiet corner, gave the faintest of approving smiles. It wasn't perfect. The scars were still there, but the storm had passed. And in its place was something that almost looked like growth. Reflection. The lesson of boundaries. Looking at her across the table that night, I realized something profound. If I'd given in to her demands, if I'd paid her mortgage and drained myself to keep her afloat, she never would have learned. She never would have grown. Boundaries hadn't destroyed our relationship. They'd saved it. Because saying no isn't cruelty. Sometimes, it's the most loving choice you can make. Closing thoughts. By now, I wasn't just surviving the chaos of family drama, I was learning from it. I was learning that love without limits turns into resentment. That peace requires strength. And that sometimes, the best gift you can give someone is the chance to stand on their own 2 feet. And as I looked around that Thanksgiving table, hearing laughter instead of arguments, I knew one thing for certain. The storm had changed us both. And maybe, just maybe, it had changed us for the better. When I look back on this journey with my sister, it almost feels like 2 completely different lifetimes. The first one was chaos arguments at family dinners, guilt-tripping phone calls, late-night texts demanding money, Facebook posts painting me as the villain. The second one was calmer. Still imperfect, but calmer. And in that calm, I found something I never thought I would. Perspective. The long road here. It had been years since that first night when she looked me in the eye and declared that I should pay her mortgage. Years since the public showdowns. The slammed doors. The whispered campaigns at family gatherings. And yet, those memories still echoed. I could still picture Grandma's steady eyes silently urging me to hold my ground. I could still feel the sting of my sister telling me I was dead to her. I could still hear Mom's sighs, begging me to help just for now. Those moments left scars. But scars, I've learned, don't mean weakness. They mean survival. Where we stand now, today, my sister and I aren't what you'd call close. We don't share every detail of our lives. We don't confide in each other the way some siblings do. But we coexist peacefully. We exchange holiday gifts. We laugh sometimes at family dinners. We share the occasional inside joke, the kind that only siblings can really understand. And sometimes, that's enough. Because relationships don't always have to be rebuilt to what they once were. Sometimes it's enough to build something new, something different, on the ashes of what burned before. The role of boundaries. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential. Boundaries saved me from financial ruin. Boundaries saved me from resentment. Boundaries saved me from losing myself in someone else's choices. And oddly enough, boundaries saved my relationship with my sister too, because if I had caved, if I had drained myself to keep her afloat, I would have grown to hate her. And hate, once it takes root, is harder to uproot than any debt. By saying no, I gave both of us a chance to grow. Grandma's legacy. Grandma's role in all this can't be overstated. Her quiet wisdom, her steady reminders, her refusal to enable my sister's behavior, all of it gave me strength when I was drowning in doubt. Even now, I can still hear her voice. Don't let her shame take root in you. Stand firm. The future will remember who held their dignity. She was right. And her words became a compass, not just for my relationship with my sister, but for how I handle boundaries in every part of my life. The final lesson. Here's what I've learned. Family is complicated. It's messy. It's painful. It's beautiful. And it's frustrating all at once. But family is also where some of life's hardest lessons are taught. My sister taught me that love without boundaries becomes exploitation. My parents taught me that peace sometimes requires disappointment. And my grandmother taught me that dignity matters more than approval. In the end, I didn't lose my sister. I didn't win against her either. What I gained was something far more valuable. Clarity. Closing thoughts. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are not responsible for fixing someone else's mistakes. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. And you are not cruel for saying no. Because sometimes, saying no is the only way to say yes to yourself, to your future, and to the possibility that those you love might finally learn to stand on their own. And if that lesson comes through storms, arguments, and years of pain, so be it. Because in the end, the calm that follows is worth every battle. And for years, I had been expected to be the umbrella. But now, for the first time, it seemed like she was learning to carry her own load. That didn't erase the past. But it did change the way I looked at the future. Grandma's words. One afternoon, I visited Grandma again. We sat on her porch, sipping tea like we always did. She looked at me, her eyes soft but sharp. "Anthony," she said, "you've given your sister the greatest gift without realizing it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You let her fail," Grandma said simply. "You let her face the consequences. Everyone else tried to cushion her. You didn't. And that's what finally made her grow. Thank you for watching the Now or So Me. From Sittard Not the Round the Watching the Quired to Cower to Catter." Her words sank deep. Because for so long, I had felt guilty about saying no. Guilty about walking away. But maybe that guilt had been misplaced all along. The shift. The next time I saw Melissa, she carried herself differently. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't suddenly glow with success. But there was a quiet steadiness about her I hadn't seen before. She talked about work schedules, about saving money, about paying my parents' rent. For once, her words weren't filled with excuses. They were filled with plans. And though part of me still kept my guard up, another part started to believe maybe, just maybe, she was finally changing. My parents too were different. They still slipped into old habits, sometimes small comments about how family should stick together. Little reminders of how things used to be. But they didn't push the way they used to. They didn't guilt-trip me. They didn't demand. I think losing the cabin had been a wake-up call. A reminder that enabling Melissa had real consequences, not just for her, but for everyone. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally learned. Sarah. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah deepened. We weren't rushing into anything. But there was a comfort between us that I hadn't felt in years. She reminded me what it was like to have someone in my corner, someone who didn't want anything from me except honesty. One evening, over dinner, she said something that stuck with me. You know, Anthony, you've been carrying this story for so long. Maybe it's time to start writing a new one. She was right. For too long, my life had been defined by family drama, by Melissa's demands, by my parents' expectations, but I didn't want that to be my whole story. A new vision. I started thinking about the future differently, not in terms of what I was running from, but what I was building toward. Maybe one day, that would mean a family of my own. Maybe it would mean new adventures, new places, new challenges, but whatever it meant, it would be on my terms. With boundaries, with respect, with peace. And that realization felt like freedom. Reflection. Looking back, I realized something I hadn't before. This whole saga wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage, or the cabin, or the endless fights. It was about identity. About reclaiming who I was outside of the role my family had cast me in. For years, I had been the responsible one. The fixer. The safety net. But now, I was just Anthony. And that was enough. Closing thoughts. If you've ever been where I was, if you've felt crushed by the weight of family expectations, if you've been told that saying no makes you selfish, hear this. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. Doors that let in peace, self-respect, and freedom. And sometimes, those doors don't just protect you. They give others the chance to finally grow. That's what I learned. And that's the story I carry now. By this point, my life felt like it had shifted onto a completely new track. The drama with Melissa, the constant guilt tripping from my parents, the endless battles over money, all of it had defined my 20s and early 30s. But now, in this new chapter, I was finally learning to breathe again. It didn't mean the past was erased. The scars were still there. But instead of weighing me down, they had become reminders of what I would never allow again. Building forward, I poured myself into the new life I was creating. Work was fulfilling. I had started mentoring a few younger employees at the office, teaching them the lessons I wished someone had taught me earlier. How to set boundaries, how to advocate for themselves, how to recognize when they were being taken advantage of. Outside of work, I found joy in the small things. Morning runs, weekend hikes, photography projects that challenged me to see the world differently. And slowly, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually living. Melissa's progress. Updates about Melissa trickled in, usually through grandma, or, occasionally, my mom. She was still working at the library. She had started saving money. She was talking about maybe moving into a small apartment of her own within the year. It wasn't dramatic progress. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. And for once I didn't feel resentment hearing it. I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, I felt proud. Not because I had fixed her, far from it, but because she was finally doing what she should have been doing, all along. Standing on her own. My parents' shift. My parents were different too. They were still themselves, still quick with unsolicited advice, still prone to reminiscing about the good old days. But something had shifted. They no longer treated me like a bottomless well of resources. They no longer expected me to solve Melissa's problems. Instead, when we talked, they asked about me. About my work, my city, my life. It felt strange. Almost foreign. But it was also healing, because for the first time, they were seeing me not as the fixer, but as their son. Sarah's presence. And then there was Sarah. What started as casual reconnection had grown into something deeper. She became a steady presence in my life. Supportive, kind, and grounding in a way I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, we were walking through the park when she said, "You know, Anthony, your story isn't just about what you went through. It's about what you chose afterward. You could have stayed bitter, stayed trapped, but you didn't. You built something new." Her words stuck with me. Because she was right. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. Grandma's health. As the months went on, Grandma's health continued to decline. Each visit felt more precious, each conversation more meaningful. She didn't have the energy she used to, but her wisdom never faded. One afternoon, as we sat together in the quiet of her living room, she said, "Anthony, promise me something." "Anything," I replied. "Promise me you'll keep choosing peace, even when it's hard, because that's the only thing that lasts." I squeezed her hand and promised. And I meant it. Reflection. Looking back, I realized how far things had come. From the phone call where Melissa demanded I pay her mortgage, to the bitter fights over the cabin, to the family dinners that felt like battlefields. Those moments had nearly broken me. But they had also remade me. They taught me to stand up for myself. They taught me to value peace over appearances. And they taught me that love doesn't mean sacrifice without limits. Closing thoughts. If you've made it this far, maybe you've carried the same kind of weight I did. Maybe you've been the one who held everything together while no one held you. Maybe you've been told that family means giving until there's nothing left of you. But here's what I've learned. Family can be love. But love without respect is just control. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. And choosing peace, even when it costs you something, is never the wrong choice. Because at the end of the day, peace isn't just freedom from chaos. It's the foundation for everything good that comes after. And for me, that's the life I'm finally living. The funny thing about peace is that once you taste it, you start to realize how little you ever had it before. In the past, my life was measured in crises. Melissa's latest demand, my parents' guilt trips, the looming threat of losing the cabin. It was constant noise, constant tension. Now, the quiet felt almost strange, but in the best way. Life in balance. In my city, I had finally settled into routines that weren't about survival, but about joy. Mornings started with runs by the river. Evenings often ended with photography projects or quiet dinners with Sarah. Work was fulfilling, not draining. And I no longer felt like I was carrying a second unpaid full-time job just managing my family's chaos. It felt like life had shifted from black and white to full color. Melissa's continued growth. Updates about Melissa kept coming, usually through grandma or my mom. She had not only kept her library job but had been promoted to a supervisory role. She was paying rent, keeping up with bills, and even starting to save. It wasn't the dramatic success story some people might imagine. But for Melissa, it was huge. And the most surprising part? She wasn't blaming me anymore. I didn't get passive-aggressive texts. I didn't get cryptic Facebook posts. Just silence and, in its own way, respect. Parents easing up. My parents were slowly changing too. They no longer pressured me with guilt trips about stepping up for family. Instead, our conversations were about everyday life. What I was cooking, how work was going. My mom even asked about my photography, genuinely curious rather than dismissive. It wasn't perfect. They still had moments where old habits slipped through, but overall, it felt like the weight between us had lightened. A moment with grandma. Grandma's health was declining, but her clarity was still sharp. One evening, I visited her and told her about Melissa's progress. She smiled, her hands resting on mine. See, Anthony? Sometimes the hardest no brings the strongest growth. You carried enough for long enough. Now you get to watch her learn to carry herself. Her words filled me with a quiet pride. Because for so long, I had doubted myself. Wondered if saying no had been selfish. Wondered if I had done the wrong thing. But now, it was clear. That no had been the most loving thing I could have done for her, for my parents, and for myself. Sarah's role. Through all of this, Sarah became an anchor. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she said, "Anthony, do you realize you've built a whole new life? One that's not about what you had to escape, but what you've chosen to create?" Her words stopped me. Because she was right. I wasn't just running from the past anymore. I was building toward a future. A future defined not by obligation, but by choice. Reflection. As I think about it now, I see the arc so clearly. It started with Melissa's demand that I pay her mortgage. It spiraled into chaos, threats, family battles, the loss of the cabin. For years, it felt like I was drowning. But in the end, all of it forced me to learn the lesson I'd been avoiding. That peace isn't given to you by others. You claim it for yourself. And when you do, everything changes. Closing thoughts. If you've ever carried the kind of weight I did, I want to remind you, you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to build a life that's yours. And you're allowed to choose peace, even when others call it selfish. Because, at the end of the day, the people who love you will learn to respect your boundaries. And the people who don't? They were never respecting you to begin with. That's the lesson I carry now. By now, the storm had long passed. Melissa had her own job. My parents had eased up. And grandma's wisdom had become the compass I carried into every decision. I had reclaimed my peace. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next disaster. But endings aren't really endings. They're transitions. And this final part of the story isn't about loss, it's about what came after. Grandma's last lesson. Not long after Melissa started steady work, Grandma's health declined quickly. I was by her side as much as I could be. We talked about everything: life, choices, regrets, and love. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "Anthony, you're proof that strength isn't about carrying the most weight. It's about knowing when to set it down." Those words were her final gift to me. When she passed, the family gathered. For once, there were no fights, no accusations, no drama. Just grief, and the quiet acknowledgement that she had been the glue holding us together. And as I stood there, I realized something. The lesson she had taught me wasn't just for my family. It was for my life. Melissa at the funeral. At the funeral, Melissa approached me. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Not for money, not for saving me, but for finally making me face myself." I nodded. "You don't have to thank me. Just keep going. That's thanks enough. For the first time, I believed she would. The cabin's shadow. After Grandma's passing, talk of the cabin surfaced again. Not in anger this time, but in memories. People shared stories, fishing trips, birthdays, summer nights under the stars. The pain of losing it was still there, but somehow lighter. Because I realized, the cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was the moments inside it. And those moments lived on. Even if the property didn't. A new chapter. Back in my city, I started focusing more on my future. Sarah and I grew closer. We didn't rush, but there was something solid between us. She was steady, kind, and real. With her, I didn't feel like the fixer. I didn't feel like the one holding the world up. I just felt like myself, and for the first time, I started imagining what it would be like to build something new with her. Or with someone. On my own terms. Reflection. Looking back on the entire journey, I see it clearly now. It began with a demand that I pay Melissa's mortgage. It spiraled into fights, threats, guilt, and the loss of the cabin. At the time, it felt like my world was falling apart, but in truth, it was falling into place, because those battles forced me to learn what I had avoided for years. That family love without respect is just control. And peace is something you choose, not something you beg for. Closing thoughts. So here's the final takeaway. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not alone in choosing yourself. Even when the people closest to you don't understand. Sometimes the hardest no is the one that saves you. And sometimes, it's the one that gives the people around you the chance to grow. 2. Melissa didn't need me to pay her mortgage. She needed me to stop paying it. My parents didn't need me to fix everything. They needed me to let them face the consequences. And I didn't need their approval. I needed my peace. And now, I have it.